So we're heading into MEDIAPALOOZA, but how is it going to happen? What should be your timeline and when do you go to pitch? Let's just unpack that on today's Media Snack live from New York.
And live from London.
It's Media Snack Live. Hello, I'm Tom Denford in New York.
And I'm David Indo from London.
Welcome to Media Snack Live. It's our weekly roundup of all the important news and stories and trends you need to know about the global media marketing industry.
In every show we ask, what is going on? What are the implications for advertisers? And what should marketers be thinking about next?
Thanks for joining us. Let's get into this week's show. Right. Back onto MEDIAPALOOZA. Last week, if you were with us last week, we introduced this concept of MEDIAPALOOZA, or reintroduced it because it's a 10-year phenomenon. It happens about every 10 years. And it is when there are just so many agency pitches all happen at the same time. Sometimes this happens. It's a weird kind of like a strange weather event that kind of happens, and we get this incredible concentration of pitches, and I think it then snowballs. People, they're talking about MEDIAPALOOZA now, and there's probably advertisers going, "What should we be pitching?" Well, this is for you, because what we're going to do today is just unpack the actual timeline of a typical weather event like MEDIAPALOOZA, how it gathers momentum and snowballs. And if you are a marketer or in marketing procurement, and this is on your radar, maybe your contract with an agency is coming to an end, maybe you're already planning a Q4 or 2027 pitch or something, you're going to need to know what this event is going to look like so you can make the most of it and navigate through it carefully and not get kind of crushed by it, because that's the danger, is that you become an actually insignificant pitch and you just lose out. So yeah. That's kind of what we're going to look at today, is just unpacking the timeline of it. And just to remind you, if you're joining us on Media Snack, if you're joining us live, this is obviously a live show. We're streaming on LinkedIn, we're streaming on YouTube, and we may or may not be streaming on TikTok. I still don't know. Somebody tell us, please. You can submit questions in real time, and if they're interesting and relevant, we'll obviously just throw them up into the chat live. You can comment on anything, or please build on what we're saying. You just stick a comment in LinkedIn or YouTube, and we see it in the studio, and we'll just bring it up on screen if it's helpful to propel us along. So thank you always to those who are willing to share their comments live. This is a show that Dave and I have been doing for a long time, but right now we're just starting off at least a 10-week program where we're unpacking MEDIAPALOOZA. It's going to be such a phenomenon. It's really important. So if you're not a subscriber, either follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe to the Media Snack channel on YouTube, and then and make sure you get alerts, because we're going to be doing this every week and unpacking it. Okay. So David, part two, let's look at what we might call the master timeline of a MEDIAPALOOZA.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're going to show marketing and procurement how to structure their calendars if they're thinking about this, because if you're pitching in the next 2 years, anytime in 2 years, you're going to be competing with a lot of other brands actually to get the best agency talent and really strong commercial terms. So let's think what is going on in terms of the timeline.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's start at a very kind of high level. I generally get one question that is asked to me by advertisers that are thinking about going to review.
Yeah.
When should we start preparing for that process? Now, most advertisers think that a review begins with the submission of an RFP, the brief to the agencies. Actually, in our experience, that's actually when it probably concludes. Most of the work that needs to be done is about preparing the business for a review. And so that happens a lot earlier. The last MEDIAPALOOZA, Tom, 2015, 2016, life was a lot easier, right? You'd get your long list of agencies, you'd send an RFI out, they'd all say yes, and you would kind of whittle them down to a point where you could appoint an agency, generally based on the cheapest media pricing. That was what I was saying.
Yeah, exactly.
In the last MEDIAPALOOZA. But that world is now gone. What you're doing is redesigning how marketing actually operates, because There's AI that needs to be taken into consideration. There's data, there's technology, there's retail media, there's specialist partners. The media marketplace and ecosystem is so much more complicated now.
Yeah.
The progressive advertisers, when they are considering a review, are asking a whole lot of different questions. They're asking, what should we bring in-house?
Yeah.
What should we buy from the agencies? Should we go to consolidate all of our media requirements with one agency, or should we bring in kind of specialist partners? Yeah. Where does AI fit in all of this? Who owns the contracts? All of these questions aren't procurement questions necessarily. They're strategic operating model questions that need to be answered before we go to review. And so the timing of all of these things becomes really, really important. If you go too early into the marketplace and you're not prepared, you haven't asked the right interrogative questions internally, then what you will be doing is you're going to get your agency designing your operating model for you. Now, what smart advertisers do is they use an agency to validate it, to validate and enable that operating model, but the work needs to be done. Yeah. So we talk about kind of a 5 or 6 quarter timing plan. And that's not to say that pitches should go on for 18 months, God forbid. But the process of consideration perhaps does take that amount of time. Yeah. And so what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and break it down into 4 phases for you, Tom.
Yep, good.
The first phase, and I'm going to refer...
This is to help the planning, right? This is so that everybody needs to know these is kind of the stages you need to go through to win in MEDIAPALOOZA.
That's right. So the first stage is understanding yourself, looking at the contracts that you have, looking at the current capabilities, the current challenges that you have within your own agency structure and ways of working. That's the first phase. So understand yourself. The second phase is design your future. So what is the operating model that you want to deploy? What is the operating model that is going to enable your media investments to work just as hard in 3 years' time? It's really important. What are the roles? Who does what internally and externally? And what are the governance protocols that you're going to put on top of that? And what is the technology that's going to enable that? So that's about designing your future. Then we get into defining your partner. So what role do you want your agency partner to play? Do you want to bring in specialists for certain verticals? Do you want to look at a one-stop shop all with one consolidated agency partner? So defining what your agency partner needs to be. And then the final one is then go to market. Now, what we tend to find, Tom, is that those pitches that are less effective or run out of steam or don't end up with the right result are advertisers that tend to ignore the first 3 phases of that process, and they go straight to market with an impatience that means they get found out during the process. So
that's what I'm going to ask, because where this gets exposed, the minute that you send a brief to the agency, you're going to get 27 questions back. That have just exposed the lack of clarity on the operating model.
And the doomsday scenario, quite frankly, given how congested the marketplace is and given how pressured the agencies are in terms of their bandwidth and resources to deploy it, the doomsday scenario is that you don't have any agencies that want to work with you. You don't have agencies that want to commit themselves to working on your brief. That is the doomsday scenario, because then you don't have an option. You're going to have to stick with the agency that you're currently working with. So making sure that you've done all the preparation, you've designed your pitch process in a way that is inspiring, that is providing the right strategic guidance and direction to the agency community, will result in the right agencies wanting to at least tender for your process, for the business.
Yeah, very good. So it's great. So and what's a typical timeline for that? I know it depends, and for those that have been following Media Snack for a while, you'll know that the business that David and I founded, which has now grown into a big global consulting business, ID Comms, specifically does help advertisers through these kind of processes, right? We work with lots of advertisers to build their operating model, to identify the right components of an agency ecosystem and set up all the contracts, all that kind of stuff. A lot of the companies that we work with are big famous brands who's spending $100 million plus a year, and they have big resources on their side. And sometimes these can be quite complex processes, and they can take a few months to kind of prepare for and work through. But yet we do have some clients we work with who are smaller, more agile, single market, spending $10 to $50 million in the US, for example, which is a ton of money. It's a load of money, but the market considers that a smaller advertiser. May have a little bit less resource. Can they move faster? What's the kind of typical timeline? Is it depend on how much you're spending, or how complex the operating model is, or what?
I think it depends on how complex the organization is. If you're trying to align multiple stakeholders, multiple markets, different business units, then obviously the alignment process, making sure that everybody is very clear what you are going to market with, takes time, and that takes longer, as does the preparation stage for those kind of more complex pitches. Where the marketing organization is perhaps leaner, where the operating structure internally is a little bit more organized, then you can perhaps be a little bit quicker. But nevertheless, those kind of 4 stages are really, really important. Understand what the foundations are. What do you currently have that you need to work on? How good are your contracts? How what kind of termination clauses do you have? Where are your capability gaps? What is your ambition in terms of bringing in more control, more contract oversight internally? And that gives you very clear visibility on what you want to build internally and what you need to be buying from an agency ecosystem. The clearer you can be in terms of going to market with a clear narrative and directive, the better the agency is going to be at responding. I'm going to share one anecdote, if I can.
We love your anecdotes. We always like your anecdotes.
And I'm sure I've shared this before, but it's my favorite one. So we conducted a big global review for a fairly sophisticated technology company, and we were kind of post honeymoon period. Once the agency had transitioned and been onboarded, we then facilitated the first half-year business review, where we kind of reviewed the service evaluation and basically the temperature of the relationship. And it was the best scored review 360 that I'd ever seen. So a year, 9 months into the relationship, the client had scored the agency had scored the client, and we were hitting kind of figures that I'd never seen before. So at the end of this review workshop, I just said, for what it's worth, this is the best scoring I've ever seen. And I want to congratulate both parties, because you've obviously found a brilliant partnership here. And the CEO of the agency stood up and she said, and I can give you the reason why this is working so well, because the brief, the clarity of the brief from the client in the pitch process was so unambiguous that we knew exactly what we needed to do in order to succeed. In order to succeed as an agency, but also to enable success within the client organization. So, and all of that work had been done prior to the RFP being kind of shared. So preparation in terms of absolute clarity to the agency community is going to be critical. Don't shortcut that.
No, very good. Very good. So that is, in any given year, that would be really good practice. If advertisers come to us and they say we're thinking about searching for a new agency, or we haven't reviewed our existing agency for a while and we want to think about that, because the media market is evolving so fast. Your agreement with an agency like 3 years later can be quite out of date, really, and missing some kind of key components. So there has to be this continuous reviewing of that existing relationship and the capabilities of that agency. And those are typically the stages that we would advise advertisers to go through, right? Which is as you said, the kind of understanding and designing the capability, design the model, and then find the agencies that fit that model. Let's think about the implications when we start to put a MEDIAPALOOZA on top of that. Because I know that you're going to come on to give a specific advice for advertisers that really has some more tangible timings of these things. But let me just run through what some of the implications are, because the big question, and we've already had this actually, in terms of response to speaking to existing clients and advertisers that we advise, thinking ahead of MEDIAPALOOZA, is like when's too early, when's too late.
Yeah.
It's really what it comes down to. So let's just thinking about that. There are some advertisers who might say, well, look, MEDIAPALOOZA, which, just to remind you, is when we just find this extraordinary peak in agency pitches that happens all at the same time. The agencies are getting ready for that. They're welcoming it. If probably they've encouraged and created this because they've all kind of set their stall out at the same time with their new platforms, new proposition, new technologies, new offerings, capabilities. They're all making new acquisitions of new capabilities, and they want to show them off. They're all coming to market at a similar time, and I think that's just triggering a lot of advertisers to say, let's go see what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened 10 years ago. It's definitely what's going to be playing now. So advertiser says, right, do we go too early? Like, should we just pitch right tomorrow because let's just get out in front of it? Well, that's one thing. Or when is going to be too late? And there is a too late. Let's start with that. There is a too late. Imagine that the agencies have been kind of building up, because there's a lot of change going on in the agency landscape. They've been building up, restructuring their teams, integrating all of their products, bringing quite disparate silo teams together across all these different types of media that you mentioned, not just paid, direct, biddable, influencer, retail, sponsorship, making all these acquisitions, bringing them together in a cohesive kind of full broad media definition. They've got platform technology sitting underneath those. They've got data sources. And these are, of course, the big holdco type agencies that we talk about a lot, but also larger independents are also making these kind of changes and progress. They're all ready to go, but they have a finite amount of a few things. They have a finite amount of talent and energy, and actually they have a finite amount of added value that they're going to be willing to give advertisers. And so when you pitch agencies, they have to agree to commercial terms and commit to resources and all of these kind of things, and we negotiate all these things. For our clients, we always want, a little bit more than our fair share. We want to get a really good deal for the advertisers that we work with. So after a while, that kind of added value element depletes over time. So if you're the 10th pitch that they're doing, in this quarter, you are somewhat going to be left with the bare bones of what's left. Certainly all the best talent is going to be already allocated to the top pitches that they've decided to go for. A load of added value will also be given on a discretionary basis to advertisers to try and woo them into that agency. And so you do find yourself sometimes that if you're at the back end of that queue, when you get to be pitched with that agency, there's really not much added value left to be got. So there's definitely too late. We think that calendar 27 is probably going to be pitch is going to be peak MEDIAPALOOZA. That doesn't mean on Jan 1 you need to drop a pitch brief. There will be some that we're working on right now who will be dropping in November, December, and they know that actually getting in ahead of the calendar year close is actually quite good, just to at least onboard agencies with the idea of a pitch.
Yeah.
You not want to be working them over the holidays, by the way. That's a surefire way to go to the back of the queue, just so you know. Is it possible to go too early? Yeah, because agencies, I think, are just assembling now. They're going to be ready, September, October time to start having initial conversations. But to your very, very important point is that moving too early when you haven't got the brief aligned with the operating model, aligned with your own internal org, would be a mistake, because that pitch will fall over at some point if you haven't got these things organized. Agencies are getting incredibly well organized around this broad operating model of media. We've seen it for the last couple of years, advising advertisers through this stuff. They're really ready. So you've got to be ready as an advertiser, and we're helping a lot of advertisers get ready. The big risk of that, the implication. Well, we'll come on. Let's come on to talk timings. So don't rush to market too early. Don't let us excite you or panic you into moving too early. Every week of the year. Okay, we run dozens and dozens of agency pitches with advertisers, small, medium, and large, and gigantic. We do some billion-dollar global pitches, but we do, you know, regional pitches with advertisers that are spending $10 million. We have a scalable product, which is based on, you know, 15 years of us innovating the agency pitch product. But if you're looking to just get into this and understand the basics of pitching, or you're in procurement and you just think, maybe I need, you know, I'm going to need some advice. We can probably manage some of it ourselves, but we're going to need some structure and advice. This could be for you, which is we're on a very lean pitch product, but it's comprehensive.
Yeah.
Called the 5-figure pitch. And you can just go to our website and find it, or you can even just go to the domain 5figurepitch.com. The 5-figure pitch simplifies the whole process down to 5 steps, 5 simple steps. Involves a 5-person team from our side, a little kind of team of specialism, so we can bring in the right people at the right point. It's very cautious and careful about the amount of agency resource that it burns up, so it's particularly helpful in MEDIAPALOOZA when agency resources is being very finite and managed very carefully. And it starts with a 5-figure price. So the basic pitch is $99,000. That's a full pitch, end-to-end pitch for 99 grand. And there's some bits that you can kind of add on as modules to that if you want to. So if you're interested or you're starting to plan a pitch, go have a look at that, 5figurepitch.com. We'll probably talk about that a little bit more next week. Okay, let's get into what should marketers be doing.
Okay, so I'm going to put myself in the shoes of a global CMO now, or a global head of procurement. Yes. Now, putting aside the 5-figure pitch, this is kind of end-to-end, big, global, sophisticated review. And I want to kind of have that at a sort of level, and then we can begin to start diluting it down based on kind of the nuances of advertisers in different sectors and different complexities. But if I'm a global CMO, this is the approach that I would take. And I'm keen on going to market in 2027. I know that it's going to be a busy marketplace, but I also need a agency in place the back end of next year in order to kind of drive my planning for the following year. That's kind of my thinking. So what I would do is Q3. So now we're halfway through Q3 2026. I would start reviewing all of my contracts. I look at my contract, I look how good they are. I'd look at my remuneration model. I'd look at my governance plans. I'd start looking at my staffing. I would do an audit of where I currently am at the moment, given the contractual and scope and the the payment structure that I have with my existing agency. That would be the first thing that I would do. The second thing I would do is I would go into Q4, so back end of this year, and I would start to assess which bits of my current operating model are working well. So the capabilities that I currently have that I want to begin to amplify, and the bits that are working badly. The bits that aren't working as effectively, I would have one of 2 questions to ask. Do I want to bring those things in-house, or am I happy for them to be operated externally, but I need my agency partner to compensate for those weaknesses? That is a really important question. So what is working well in my internal operating model, and what needs to be true for my external operating model for my media management processes to work really effectively? That's beautiful, because not only does it give you some very clear action points as to what needs to be adjusted internally, but it gives you a blueprint with which you can then use to create a brief for your agency review. So that delivers your blueprint, your agency ecosystem blueprint. Then you go into preparation. So Q1 of next year, prep. This is the most important stage of the pitch management process, because here you're creating all of the evaluation criteria, you're creating the briefing materials, you're creating the scopes of work, you're defining what remuneration model you want to go and impose on your agency partners. You're defining what the scenario plans. What if procurement and marketing disagree? You don't want to have that disagreement at the end of a pitch process. You want to have those scenarios designed and aligned before you go to market. So get all of that stuff done. If you can lock in optimum preparation where everything is done before you invite or engage with the agency partners, then the pitch management process, which will take you into perhaps Q2 of next year, is simply process management. Because all of the difficult decisions, all of the difficult conversations, all of the strategic decision making has happened in that kind of second and third stages, right? That's really important. Then you go into pitch management, and there, trust me, going into next year, the more considered, the more strategic, the more informed, the more inspirational the brief to the agencies, the greater the response from the agency community is going to be, because they will be inundated with briefs. You've got to make sure that your brief rises to the top. You've got to make sure that your brief, in sight of the agency CEO, is thinking, this is the brief that I want my A team working on.
Yeah.
That is going to be absolutely critical. So that would be how I would kind of roll it out over the next sort of 7, 8 months.
That's good. And that's a, excuse me, that's a fairly kind of gentle timeline, isn't it? I mean, it's a very realistic and reasonable timeline. Sometimes advertisers come to us and say, I think we talked about it on MediaSnet recently, but you know, we have famously had a client who said, all gas, no brakes. Like, what's the quickest that we can do this? We're like, fine. Well, it can be done in a condensed way. We always say we can move as fast as you can. We say that to every advertiser that we've ever worked with, because the thing that typically slows it down is the complexity internally. But it's worth working that stuff through, isn't it? To make sure that you've got that full alignment up front, and then actually the pitch itself can run pretty quick these days. I mean, we can run these, you know, in a matter of weeks. As I said, you know, the 5-figure pitch, it just kind of agency engagement can be done in a matter of weeks, but the prep can take a bit longer. Okay, that's really sorry.
Just one final point on this, Tom, and I think this is probably the most important thing that I want to kind of say. In our experience, where pitches have kind of fallen off the rails, the source of that issue is invariably one thing, and that's misalignment internally within the key stakeholders. If you've got misalignment, at all misalignment between procurement, marketing, and perhaps finance, that's where the issues are. So that preparation stage is getting those key stakeholders, those key departments pointing in the right direction, fully aligned and focused on the end result. Your pitch will be brilliant.
Very good. Okay, good. Well, listen, as we wrap up, as I said, this is part 2 of at least a 10-part series, because we've mapped out at least 10 good, really interesting things I think we can talk about with this, and it will build into quite specific things that you should be thinking of, so you can follow along. Think of this as a playbook for prepping for MEDIAPALOOZA. If you need help on that, just obviously reach out directly to us. Go to idcomms.com. You can see at the bottom of the screen there, or 5figurepitch.com to get more specific advice if you're an advertiser. That's it. Next week, join us again. We'll continue to talk about MEDIAPALOOZA. But that's it for this week. See you next time.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks for watching MediaSnack Live. If you found it helpful and want to learn more, head to idcomms.com to get more tips, tools, and resources to help you get good at media. We'll see you next week.